Si vous tenez à votre santé, vous voulez vous soigner avec des méthodes efficaces et sans danger. La médecine conventionnelle, fondée sur les preuves, apporte normalement cette garantie. Mais il y a aussi les autres pratiques de soins. On les appelle médecine douce, médecine alternative, médecine complémentaire, et elles intéressent et séduisent de nombreuses personnes. Le problème est de savoir si le thérapeute que vous consultez peut vous apporter une aide efficace, car notre ressenti personnel peut nous tromper. Mesurer objectivement l'efficacité d'un soin réclame compétences et méthodes. C'est le travail de certains chercheurs. L'un d'eux a passé toute une carrière à étudier ces pratiques. Il a écrit plus de 1000 articles de recherche, plus de 50 livres et s'est vu remettre le prix John Maddox de défense de la science. Nous rencontrons Edzard Ernst.
Can you tell us about your background, your formation, your career? Who are you?
I grew up into a family, a very medical family. My father was a doctor, my grandfather was a doctor. Our family doctor was a homeopath. So as I grew up, for me, alternative medicine and homeopathy was just medicine. It was just normal. Eventually I decided to study medicine myself, and there I learned what proper medicine is, and by a series of coincidences my first job as a junior doctor was in a homeopathic hospital, actually the only homeopathic hospital at the time in Germany. And this is where I learned homeopathy as a physician. I was very impressed by it because people actually did get better when I treated them. And that was puzzling because in medical school I had learned that homeopathy cannot possibly work and does not work, does not contain anything. So for me this created a lot of questions. And when I had left that hospital after about half a year, I pursued a normal medical career, became a specialist in physical medicine and rehabilitation, and also had an interval where I went to London and did some basic research, made a PhD, and started to think critically, started to think as a scientist. And then all these questions about homeopathy and other alternative treatments came back to me, and I thought this would be an interesting subject to do some research, because there wasn't much research going on in this area. Later I became a professor of physical medicine, first in Hanover, Germany, and then head of a very large department in Vienna. At that stage I was in charge of lots of things, and I could decide what research we were doing, and I again remembered all these questions, and I started doing some research into homeopathy and other alternative treatments. And one day I was reading The New Scientist, and there was a little announcement, an advertisement, and they were looking for somebody to form the first chair of complementary medicine in England. And I thought, that is interesting. I applied and I got the chair. So then all of a sudden what had been my hobby horse, alternative medicine, had become my job. My job was to scientifically investigate alternative medicine at Exeter University, England. And that's what we did. I built up a team of about 20 researchers, very multidisciplinary, multinational, and we had lots of fun. And we were extremely productive, but our results did not really show what enthusiasts had been wanting us to show. Very few of our results were encouraging or positive. Most of them were negative. Certainly in homeopathy, virtually every single result that we published was negative. And I quickly became the enemy of the world of homeopathy. So that's me. Once you're trained as a scientist, you ought to know that you have to leave your personal emotional baggage behind. You establish a hypothesis and you test the hypothesis, which means you do everything possible scientifically to prove that the hypothesis is wrong. Only when you have failed proving it wrong, it is correct. But for enthusiasts of homeopathy, these attempts to prove homeopathy wrong looks as though somebody is trying to actually ditch homeopathy, and that, in my case, was certainly not true. Well, that is a very interesting question, and I'm not sure I can answer it properly. The chair was funded by somebody who was very pro-alternative medicine, Sir Maurice Lang, a very nice gentleman, and we became good friends. And he was intelligent enough to realize that good academic research has to be objective. So he was always happy with me in my work, even though I produced negative results. Whether the university had wanted somebody who is more pro than I am, I really don't know. At the beginning I thought everybody was very happy with me, and later on there were some interferences. Prince Charles intervened and so forth, and people got more and more anxious with me, to put it mildly, and they certainly would have wanted somebody who is more the type of researcher that Prince Charles would have liked to see. I usually call it alternative medicine simply because that's what people call it. Everybody knows roughly what it is. If we call it complementary medicine, it might be better semantically, but lots of people don't know what the word is. Lots of people even misspell it. If we call it complementary and alternative medicine, it gets a bit of a mouthful. I think all umbrella terms like this are not really quite adequate, because the treatments that are under these umbrellas are so very diverse and different. Some are promising, some are totally rubbish, and some are dangerous. Yeah, lots of people say if it works, it's medicine. If it doesn't work, it's alternative medicine. So there's this discussion. I've never really quite engaged in that discussion, because there are some alternative medicines that do work and are not yet adopted by mainstream medicine. A good example, in my view, is St. John's wort, a herbal remedy that is used for treating depression and is probably at least as good as conventional antidepressants. That's a good example for an alternative medicine which does work and is not yet integrated into mainstream medicine. No, it would be very naive to think that the human need for something mystical, for something other than science, will ever disappear. What we can do, and what I try to do, is to minimize the damage bogus treatments do to patients. When I started working at Exeter in 1993, lots of people said alternative medicine cannot be researched. It defies proper research. It defies science because it's so very subtle, it's very special, it's very holistic, it's very individualized, and all these attitudes I had to fight with and show that there is only one science and that is applicable to any type of healthcare, however we call it. So that has changed. Another thing that has changed is people used to say the wonderful thing about alternative medicine is that it is harmless. And now we have done a lot of research on this. Now we do understand that there are considerable risks associated with some alternative medicines, I would say with all alternative medicines. And that is, I think, very, very important because these treatments are out there. And because they're out there, the first thing we need to make sure is that they are safe, that nobody gets harmed by them. In 1993, I was the first professor of complementary medicine in the world. Since then, similar professorships have mushroomed. There are plenty. So one would think that's a good thing. I'm very skeptical about that because, as far as I can see, there is not one institution that really critically looks at these treatments. Most of my so-called colleagues are not really researchers, they're promoters of alternative medicine. And the difference is huge. They are not testing hypotheses, they're trying to prove that their hunches or hypotheses are correct. And that's a very, very important distinction.
So, not enough skepticism in this research?
Very close to zero skepticism. And if somebody, like I did, voices some skeptical notions, then he is more or less ousted, like I was. For about 5 years, the Fraternity of Alternative Medicine looked at me suspiciously, and then they said, this guy is not one of ours, and we don't want to have anything to do with him. It's a long story, but to put it short, I was asked to be involved in something Prince Charles had commissioned, a paper on the economical impact of alternative treatments in the NHS in England. When I saw that this was going all the wrong way and that my help, my productive help was rejected in putting it right, I asked the man in charge to withdraw my name from the document. And I was phoned up by the Times newspaper by a journalist who I knew quite well, and he said, why are you not involved in this, and so forth. And I said, I cannot talk to you about it because I'm under confidentiality. He said, the paper is in front of me, it has been given to me, so please do talk about it. And I said, okay, I talk about the reasons why I withdrew from the project. And I told him that this was very, very dodgy, very strange things going on. And this was on the title page of the Times the next day. And the man in charge, a chap called Christopher Smallwood, sent me an email and said he will make sure that I regret it. After that came a complaint by the first private secretary of Prince Charles to my vice chancellor that I had broken confidentiality. My vice chancellor phoned back and said, "Are you sure you want me to investigate Professor Ernst, because that could backfire rather a lot. He has good contacts with journalists and etc." And the private secretary said, "Hold on, I inquire." He phoned back again and said, "Yes, go for him." And then my vice chancellor did go for me. I had an investigation, 13 months of investigation, very, very miserable time. I fell ill. I had to take lawyers against the institution that should have protected me. Incredible stuff, really incredible stuff. And at the end, I was declared innocent. But during these 13 months, all support had broken down. My staff was being dismissed, contracts were not continued, etc., etc. And eventually I was told that there was no more money, and I had to go into early retirement, which I did.
So, the win?
Well, did Prince Charles win? No, he certainly didn't win. Because that created so much bad publicity for him that he had a lot of egg on his face, and in some ways it made me a celebrity. I stood up against the future king of Great Britain, and a lot of people respect me for that. So I would say I'm the winner in that story. Well, it's such a big subject. Lots of people try to think in general, alternative medicine is good, alternative medicine is bad. I object to any such generalities, because there are too many treatments. Somebody counted 400 different treatments and diagnostic techniques. I would say some are quite promising, some even are effective, proven effective, like for instance St. John's wort. The vast majority is under-investigated, so we cannot really, as scientists, we can suspect this or that, but we cannot say with certainty that this is ineffective or effective. And those that have been investigated, the majority of that seems to not work, and the majority of that also seems to be burdened with adverse effects. All the statistics say that the typical user of alternative medicine is a female, middle-aged, well-educated person who has quite a lot of money. There's not much research on that particular question. The non-doctor alternative therapists are usually poorly trained, usually over-optimistic as to how much they can achieve with their treatments, unaware of risks, that sort of thing. And in my personal experience, the doctor homeopaths are those physicians who didn't quite get on in mainstream medicine. To put it really very simply, they found that they found conventional medicine too much of a challenge, and homeopathy is so much more easy. In Germany, we have a whole profession called Heilpraktiker, which are basically untrained practitioners, uneducated practitioners, and they practice a lot of homeopathy. And in England we have two kinds of homeopaths. The lay homeopath who hasn't studied medicine, and the doctor homeopath. The lay homeopaths are by far the larger groups. Alternative treatments generally started booming in the 70s, and that had a lot to do with the New Age movement. People were against the establishment, people were against established sciences, etc., etc. Since then, a lot of things have happened. We have the internet. If you go on the internet, we have 50 million websites on alternative medicine. A huge market opened up, and a lot of people went into that market because to sell products in alternative medicine is really very easy. The restrictions are minimal, and we had the established firms, some homeopathic firms, but a lot of newcomers came into that market, which was booming, and for the last 10 years or even longer had increases in turnovers of 6%, 10% in that range, which is, because it's so constant, it's quite huge.
So is it still on the rise?
Yes, still rising. With homeopathy specifically, we see that the picture differs from country to country. In England, homeopathy has been stopped on the NHS, so there's a sharp decrease of homeopathy in that sense. In Germany, it seems to have been rising steadily, as I described, and has now reached a peak, and very recently has just dropped a little bit. Whether that continues, we don't know.
In France?
France, I don't know, je sais pas. It is fairly constant. Lots of people say more and more people use alternative medicine. Most scientific papers on the subject start with that sentence. More and more people use alternative medicine. It's not true. We don't see that. Not in America, not in England, not in Europe as a whole. In France, I'm not quite sure, but I would be surprised if it's actually rising. It's fairly constant.
So it's the same amount of people, but they consume more medicines.
That is probably true. A lot of people take 10 or even more different types of alternative treatments. Vitamins, herbal treatments, homeopathic remedies, etc. There's a certain common ground in the sense that there's a distrust of science, a distrust of conventional medicine, an exaggeration of the risks in conventional medicine. People say, oh, vaccines are so very dangerous, etc., etc., or chemotherapy kills people. And nobody denies that a lot of conventional treatments are really very, very dangerous. There's absolutely no question. But what people forget is that there has to be a balance between risk and benefit. And if for some alternative treatments there is no benefit, then even a tiny risk will shift this balance. They're focused on the risk of conventional treatments. They say radiotherapy, terrible, and chemotherapy kills people, and vaccination just awful, don't do it. And they seem to forget how much good these treatments do, and that the balance is still very, very positive, particularly for vaccination. Yes, homeopathy for me has a special place to start with, because it has been with me since my youth. It was my first experience as a doctor, but also, generally speaking, it has a special place. In England, when the NHS was created in 1948, all alternative treatments were defined as outside the NHS except homeopathy. Why? People say because it had royal protection. The royal family has been an advocate for homeopathy since generations. In other countries, in France, homeopathy is very, very popular, and the reason for that is because Hahnemann spent his last years in Paris, became a sort of type of guru almost in Paris, and in Germany homeopathy is very popular, also a complicated history. For instance, the Nazis were very much in favor and were pushing homeopathy and other alternative treatments because they were Teutonic and they were German. When homeopathy was invented 200 years ago, it actually was much, much better than what medicine had to offer, because the medicine, it's called now heroic medicine because you had to be a hero to survive it. The medicine in many cases was more dangerous than the disease it was trying to cure. So there came Hahnemann, who basically invented the placebo. There was nothing in it, it did absolutely nothing. And that was an advantage because it at least did not kill people. So homeopathy very fast became very popular. And why did it survive? Because it was popular, it appeals to people, it has the image of being very gentle, very human, very holistic, very individualized. All these things appeal to a lot of people. The popularity of homeopathy in France does puzzle me. I live a lot of my time in France now, and I see very rational people totally believing in homeopathy. And when I tell them what I think about homeopathy and the facts and the evidence, they say, well, it works for me, and it is a very puzzling phenomenon that in France so many people adhere to homeopathy and you cannot deter them, and it took such a long time for skeptics to even raise their voice and be heard nationally in national newspapers and so forth. And I think only now the debate in France is starting, whereas in other countries it has started much longer ago. Allopathy is an interesting word because it was a derogatory term created by Hahnemann to make conventional medicine look bad. And he also used the word Schulmedizin, which is very commonly used still today in Germany, which is equally derogatory, and people don't reflect and don't think that these are really not very nice terms. People don't reflect, people don't, and if you go to Germany, you see on virtually every pharmacy, you see two words, allopathy, homeopathy. It's ridiculous, but people got used to it. Well, the biggest falsehood is that it works. It doesn't work. We have mountains of evidence to show that it doesn't work. Another falsehood is that it is safe. The homeopathic remedy may be safe, but homeopathy isn't safe. What homeopaths do isn't safe. They advise, for instance, people not to vaccinate their children. That isn't safe. That is actually very unsafe. Another thing that people believe about homeopathy, it's natural. They think it is based on plants. Homeopathy can be based on anything from X-rays to vacuum to Berlin Wall, and also plants, but anything really. And people believe that it is medicine. It is not medicine. There's nothing in it. People are not aware how dilute homeopathic remedies is. The best-selling homeopathic remedy from Boiron, oscillococcinum, is diluted at a degree of C200, which is less than 1 molecule per all molecules of the universe. So there's nothing in it. But it's not harmless because it is used as an alternative for effective treatment. If that happens to a patient who has rheumatism, it perhaps isn't that bad, except that patient's pain of rheumatic pain will continue. If it happens to a patient who has cancer, it will almost certainly hasten his demise. It will kill him. The advice of homeopaths to treat cancer and to use it as an alternative treatment for cancer is lethal. Homeopathy is totally stagnant, at least from one point of view. Classical homeopathy is classical homeopathy and will be classical homeopathy in 1 century. If you had an exam, if you were sitting in an exam in classical homeopathy, Hahnemann would certainly pass the exam. If you have a physician from that time, Hufeland or somebody else, sitting an exam for internal medicine, he would not even get 1 point out of 100. What I'm trying to say is that medicine evolves at a speed which is breathtaking. Homeopathy is stagnant at a speed that is breathtaking.
To that we can answer that because it's true, and the truth doesn't have to evolve.
Yes, that's what homeopaths would probably say. It is perfect and you cannot make something that is perfect more perfect. That is their attitude and shows how deluded they are, because it is not perfect. Something that doesn't work is not perfect. Yes, I've met lots of homeopathic doctors. I've worked in the hospital, and one thing I will always say is that they have a lot of compassion, empathy, time, everything people crave for, to be understood, to be given that compassion. And that is what makes homeopathy in many cases effective, because just listening and understanding a patient is some sort of psychotherapy. In that sense, homeopathy is quite good. And to put it simply, one could say good medicine is composed of 2 elements. We used to call one the art of medicine, the other one the science of medicine. So homeopathy and homeopaths are very good at the art of medicine, 0 at the science. If we look at lots of what is happening in modern medicine, in scientific medicine, obviously very, very good at science, often forgetting the art of medicine. And this creates a vacuum and a need for something. And we were discussing earlier why homeopathy is so popular, and I think it is that need for more empathy, for more understanding, for more therapeutic contact that makes homeopathy welcome with so many people. I don't think there's a good argument for homeopathy. There's an argument for more empathy, more compassion in medicine in general. And there homeopaths can teach us something, I believe. But there's no good argument for using homeopathy. For being empathetic, you don't need quackery. You can be empathetic with real medicine. Well, the worst argument is that it can cure cancer, that it can cure... I've just written a blog about somebody who advocates it as the best treatment for gangrene. Gangrene is when your feet are rotting away because there's no blood coming there, for instance. And this homeopath claims that homeopathy is the best treatment for gangrene. This is criminal. Also to advise people not to have their kids immunized, that is criminal in my view. Alternative medicine is such a mixed bag, and we are dealing with the whole spectrum. We're dealing with some particularly herbal treatments which clearly are effective. That is not surprising. Lots of our modern medications actually originate from plants. So some herbal treatments contain pharmacologically active molecules, and therefore they are effective. They also have side effects, but that's a different question. Then we have a whole spectrum of treatments and diagnostic techniques where we are uncertain and the evidence is mixed, or the evidence is just not there. And then we have quite a lot of treatments such as homeopathy where we can be quite certain that it is ineffective and therefore also quite dangerous. Acupuncture is a very interesting subject because the research, plenty of research, thousands of studies, lots of them come from China. Very unreliable stuff comes from China for a number of reasons, and therefore we really don't know. If you're an optimist, you could say there's perhaps something in it. If you're a pessimist, you would say forget about it. Osteopathy is very, very popular in France. The assumptions that underpin osteopathy are non-scientific and even anti-scientific and quite ridiculous. So it is a very implausible treatment, and the evidence shows that maybe with the exception of back pain, it doesn't work. And the thing is that osteopaths, particularly in France, claim it works for all sorts of things. And there's quite simply no evidence for these claims, and I find it ridiculous to see how popular it is in France.
Naturopathy?
Naturopathy is a mixed bag, which includes herbal treatments, some of which we have already mentioned, plus all other modalities that nature provides, electricity, heat, cold, and some of it can be quite useful, not hugely effective, but quite useful. The thing is that, like osteopaths, naturopaths claim to be curing just about everything, and that is quite dangerous. So I would caution people to go to see a naturopath if they're seriously ill.
Lithotherapy?
Well, that's just ridiculous. I mean, you couldn't invent something that is less plausible than crystal therapy, and the claims that are made are really strange, and I would caution anybody to believe in any of that. Fasting, obviously fasting is good to lose weight. That's just a physical law, but it has to be done under medical supervision, and lots of people caution not to fast because it is just a short-term gain. So maybe for weight reduction, but for other things, temporary improvements perhaps, but as soon as you start eating, your rheumatism or whatever you want to cure with fasting will come back. Well, if you have chemotherapy, you need good nutrition. The last thing you need is fasting. Oncologists weigh their patients each time they see them to make sure they're not actively and rapidly losing weight, because that is a very bad sign. Fasting and chemotherapy, definitely not. Hypnotherapy, good for some indications like irritable bowel syndrome. Plenty of evidence to show that it works for that. But one has to caution, there's no placebo, so we don't know whether it's a placebo effect or but who cares if the patient is helped and only suffers from irritable bowel syndrome, hypnotherapy, okay. If the patient suffers from stomach pain and has a stomach cancer, hypnotherapy may kill him. No. We have looked into that in relation to cigarette smoking, whether it helps people to stop smoking, and the short answer is no. I think we have to start with children if we want to change society. In schools we have to teach children how to think rather than just learn, and there's a difference, and foremost to think critically, and that then goes into adult life, into academic studies. Critical thinking is essential, and I'm sad to say, after studying medicine, after teaching medicine for much of my life, that very simple message hasn't arrived yet. We still do not teach medical students how to think critically, and in my view this is what they need most, because medical knowledge changes so quickly, and the only tool that equips you with coping with this change is critical thinking. Well, politicians think in terms of periods of getting re-elected, so they would think in terms of 4 or 5 years, and in healthcare this is too short. We have to take a much longer view. So this dilemma, as soon as a politician feels that being pro-homeopathy, for instance, will give him votes, he or she will be pro-homeopathy, and that is terrible. The other thing that is terrible is far too many politicians understand science, and particularly if a politician is in a subject where science matters, I think they need to be trained properly. I'm speaking here for England. I don't know the French situation at all in that respect, but in England we have a level of ignorance in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, what science is concerned, that is quite awful. I wish I knew that. Obviously, medical sciences are galloping ahead with progress and things, and lots of things become treatable that haven't been treatable. So progress is definitely on the cards, I would say. but we ought to make sure that this doesn't go at the expense of what I earlier called the art of medicine, the compassion. Because if it does, then it opens the door towards all sorts of quackery. People will seek the therapeutic relationship, they will seek the compassion and the empathy that quacks are giving them. And therefore my advice to the medicine of the future, make scientific progress, but do not delegate empathy and compassion to quacks, because that is like shooting in your own feet. The pharmacists, particularly in France, are very special. You go in a pharmacy and you get your prescription, and in all likelihood, and I've seen this many times, the pharmacist will then say, I also have here a little homeopathic product, why don't you try that? In the worst case scenario, you come to a pharmacy and you want something for complaint or symptom, and he or she will say, why don't you try homeopathy? So pharmacists have studied, obviously, they are healthcare professionals, they know that homeopathy is bullshit, and yet they have the audacity to sell this bullshit to patients. This is not just unethical, it is, in my view, illegal. And they have their windows decorated by Beaucoup. So I wonder why they do it. I just wonder why they do. Do they earn more money on homeopathy? They do? The margin is better?
Yeah.
Awful. Well, there are so many institutions, medical schools, that are now creating professorships or have lectureships in alternative medicine. I think we should demand that there is objective research going on, not promotion of this or that treatment, but objective scientific research of high quality. I think this is very important, and I think this is much neglected. In other words, what universities are researching in my field, alternative medicine, at present, is so substandard that it is very often scandalous. Why did I say I was impressed as a young doctor by homeopathy? Why was I impressed when as a brand new physician, I treated patients with homeopathy in the homeopathic hospital? I was impressed because every young doctor is impressed when he meets his or her first patients. I was impressed because patients actually did get better. So the question is, why did they get better? Did they get better because I gave them the homeopathic remedy? That's what I thought at the time. Only later I began to think maybe they got better because I gave them some empathy and some understanding. I gave them time. I listened to their problems. Maybe they got better because time already made them better. So many diseases get better over time. Maybe they got better by a placebo effect. Maybe they didn't even get better. Maybe they just told me they got better because they wanted to be kind to me. So these are all questions. And if you analyze these questions carefully, you find that it has certainly nothing to do with the homeopathic remedy. It's all the other factors together, but not the homeopathic remedy.
Thank you very much for your time.